It's time to eat.
What are you hungry for?
Sit down and get ready to consume an abundance of fantasy football knowledge from Ross Tucker and Joe Dolan.
Feed me now. I'm starving.
On the Fantasy Feast Eating Podcast.
Yeah, let's eat, baby. It is the Fantasy Feast Eating Podcast. It is, of course, presented by DraftKings. Love using the code Ross over on the DraftKings app, playing best ball. I think we're just about done with our draft and with our listeners. And then I also love using that for different codes and different discounts over on the DraftKings Sportsbook app. I am Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman, 5 teams, 7 years. Thankfully, it enabled me to get these broadcasting gigs with CBS and Westwood One and the Philadelphia Eagles, who kick off the preseason on Friday night against the Ravens. Looking forward to that one quite a bit, although it looks like it might be raining a lot, so that could be interesting. You can always check me out on social media at Ross Tucker NFL. You can check him out at FG_Dolan. He is the fantasy gangster from fantasypoints.com, where you can still use that code 24Feast. Now is a big time for people to get the information from Fantasy Points. They do a terrific job. You need the information anyway, the data suite, all that stuff. You might as well get the discount, and it's 24Feast. Joe, one of my favorite times of year, because we're going to do tiers of Dolan, and I love your tiers, not just like tier 1, tier 2. Joe names his tiers, and they crack me up. So it's yet another reason why I'm a big Joe Dolan guy, and look forward to this. But here, we'll do quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends over the next 4 weeks. So you guys, by the 29th, will know who you should be drafting between the 29th and the opening night of the season. You can always go back and listen. You can also go to youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL and watch. I will say this, Joe, before we get into your quarterbacks, I'm curious how much your rankings, how you feel about players changes based on the preseason. We had the Hall of Fame game last week. Now we have preseason week 1. We'll see some guys, like the Raiders, I guess both their quarterbacks are going to play, right? Jaden Daniels is going to play. Other guys aren't going to play. What matters in the preseason? What's the level of impact it has on your rankings?
Not a whole lot, Paul. I just did the morning show with Paul Kelly, Ross. So not a whole lot, Ross. Especially in this day and age, we have fewer preseason games than we did just a couple of years ago. And players are playing even less in the preseason. So what it's going to change is some of the lower end guys, the rookies, the second year players who maybe didn't get a whole lot of snaps, and seeing guys like that. But for the guys in the elite tiers, I guess we just got news that Joe Burrow is going to play in the first preseason game. That's not going to change anything for me because those guys are going to play 1 or 2 series max. So, and maybe some of the more hardline coaches are going to play their starters for a half, but it's not going to be a whole lot. Certainly nothing that's going to really change my opinions overall. If a young player looks good, that'll pique my interest, but nothing crazy in terms of changing rankings.
Got it. Okay, good to know. I would think too, it's rookies and it's guys that we're looking at in later rounds of the best ball draft. Speaking of that, by the way, I don't know if we're going to have a second best ball draft, Joe, because I think we have 4 or 5 people we've announced for the second best ball draft, but I don't know if anybody else has even attempted. I haven't gotten an email of someone rating and reviewing any of our shows. Haven't gotten an email of someone taking advantage of our sponsors. So right now we need at least 10 other than me and Joe to have a second best ball draft. We had a bunch of guys in the first best ball draft, which is just about to finish up. I don't know. I guess there's not as much interest this year as there's been previous years. If you're interested, take advantage of any of the sponsors you hear on the show or on the sponsor tab at rosstucker.com, or just rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or whatever app you use. Either way, email it to me, ross at rosstucker.com. Here we go, Joe. It is time for Tiers of Dolan. You've got the elites, and you have three guys in that category: Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, so these three guys provide you with both upside with their arms and certainly with their legs. Lamar, two-time MVP. Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen, perennial MVP candidates. We got the tush push. Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts are essentially their team's goal line backs. Lamar Jackson is not that, but Lamar Jackson has also led the Ravens in rushing, 6 consecutive seasons. I don't know if that's going to be the case this year with Derrick Henry, but Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, they provide you with elite rushing upside. They provide you with sky-high floors because of that rushing. In the case of Jalen Hurts, he also has elite wide receivers. Josh Allen, we know the receiving group is being rebuilt this year. We'll see if they have some success. The Ravens, obviously, a little bit thinner at wide receiver than the Eagles are, but these guys are the elite of the elite fantasy quarterbacks because they have two things. They have both the dual threat skill set and they have the track record. And that's what's going to separate them from some of the other guys that we're going to talk about on this show. But the elite dual threat skill set and the track record of fantasy production is what separates these three from the rest of the group. Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, three of the best in fantasy football history at the quarterback position.
Wow. And is that the order, Joe? Josh, Jalen, Lamar?
Yeah, that's the order. Again, when we're talking about tiers, which I think is an extremely important concept for snake drafts, but especially for auction or salary cap drafts, they're ranked similarly to me. That's the order of preference, but if you were to put Lamar first saying he's the best player of the three, or if you were to put Jalen Hurts first saying he's got the best receivers of the three, then I'm not going to argue with you. These guys are three guys who are put together very similarly.
Next up, you have the best quarterback. Real quick, Joe, on the Hurts thing, I just got to ask you this. He looks fast in camp. He looks healthy. However, any concern that maybe with Barkley there that his runs will be cut back, especially down near the goal line?
A little bit. And obviously Kelsey's gone. But the thing about the tush push is I think the tush push is successful because Jalen Hurts is so strong. Obviously Jason Kelsey helps. But, Ross, you and I discussed Cam Jurgens. You thought Cam Jurgens had a great season at right guard last year. Obviously center is a much more mental position that he's going to have to account for. But Cam Jurgens is a hoss, man.
Well, yeah, I mean, a couple things. First of all, the biggest reason why the tush push is successful is because Landon Dickerson and Jordan Mailata are total freaks of nature. Dickerson's probably 355, 360. Mailata's 380. They're in their mid-20s. They're in their prime. They are movers of men. Like, those guys are monsters. And they're like an unstoppable force. Jurgens is actually stronger than Kelsey, like in the weight room. He's a total freak show of an athlete. I have no concerns about Jurgens. Interestingly, my biggest concern about their success with the tush push is that it seems like anecdotally they have an unusually high number of plays that end at like the half or 1 yard line.
That's the thing.
Like, you know what I mean? Like how many? If half of those could have been touchdowns, and then Hurts doesn't get them.
Right. So it's more like when I think of the tush push, I think of more. Oh, the Eagles are going to go for it on 4th and inches because of it. You're right. Like you're 100% right about that. I said people ask about Saquon Barkley. What's his touchdown upside? And I'm like, well. What if A.J. Brown gets tackled at the 2 instead of the 1, right? Saquon's getting that carry. It's not going to be the tush push. So I agree with you there. It's just that Jalen Hurts looking fast is the key to me. Like early last season, Ross, we saw it in week 1. last year where it looked like Jalen Hurts was shying away from contact, and it lasted throughout much of the season. The fact that he looks slimmed down, he looks faster, has me really excited about Jalen Hurts from a fantasy perspective. There was also a really good story on ESPN today breaking down the disconnect of Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni and the steps that they have taken towards working through that, trying to improve. I don't know. I can see Jalen Hurts having a really good bounce back season this year.
All right, so the next category, you have the best quarterback in football, but talking, of course, about Patrick Mahomes.
So Patrick Mahomes was the quarterback 14 in fantasy points per game last year. That was, and from a metric standpoint, an efficiency standpoint, it was the worst season of his career. How much of that fault was his? By the way, they won the Super Bowl. So again, we grade Patrick Mahomes on a curve. But the thing is now they made a concerted effort to improve at receiver. As of right now, Ross, Rashee Rice hasn't been suspended, by the way, which means he's becoming one of the best value picks in all of fantasy football. Because if we were guaranteed he wouldn't be suspended, he probably would be a third-round pick. So we're talking about a guy who hasn't been suspended in his big slot. They went out and they got Hollywood Brown. They drafted Xavier Worthy, so they have more speed at receiver. Kelsey's still there. I've given you my thoughts on Kelsey for fantasy this year. I just talked to Brett Whitefield this morning, and Brett said, I wouldn't be shocked if Mahomes has the best statistical year of his career. That's a high bar to cross, because in 2018, he threw for 5,000 yards and 50 touchdowns. I'm not going to go there with Mahomes, but I think there's good reason to bet he bounces back from his QB 14 finish last year.
Good reason to bet. I will have some Labatt Blue Lights at the beach this weekend with my family and friends, living life to the power of we. Always enjoy responsibly beer. Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. Joe, new sponsor alert. Smirnoff is the perfect vodka for crafting delicious cocktails that are easy to make and versatile for any and all fans over 21. When it comes to the NFL, we do game days, as Smirnoff helps bring fans together to cheer on their favorite team. Love it. Official vodka partner of the NFL. Grab a bottle of Smirnoff at your local retailer. Head to Smirnoff.com to find recipes of delicious cocktails perfect for game day. Please drink responsibly. Smirnoff number 21 vodka, distilled from grain, 40% alcohol by volume. The Smirnoff Company, New York, New York. Please do not share with anyone under legal drinking age. Okay, we did the elites. We did the best quarterback in football, but I like that this guy has his own category. The next elite, Anthony Richardson.
Yeah. So Anthony Richardson played in 4 games last year. He finished 1 of them. But on a fantasy points per drop back basis, it was the best season we've basically ever seen from a quarterback. The sample size is very small. But that sample size was so exciting that Anthony Richardson's being drafted among the top 5 or 6 quarterbacks in fantasy football. He's got a coach in Shane Steichen who coaxed Jalen Hurts' best season out of him. He's got the efficiency metrics on a small sample. He's got an underrated group of receivers with Michael Pittman, Josh Downs. They obviously drafted A.D. Mitchell. He's got a running back next to him who's going to help open some running lanes for Richardson. He's got all the ingredients to be an elite fantasy quarterback. We've just got to see it on a consistent basis. You are not getting a discount on Anthony Richardson. The fact of the matter is, even though he played in just 4 games, it got people excited enough that they're drafting him as if he is an elite fantasy quarterback. On an efficiency basis, he was. On a volume basis, we'll see. You're not getting a discount on Richardson, but there are valid reasons to be very excited about him.
All right, you said on a per snap basis he had the best fantasy what ever?
Basically, the best fantasy points per dropback basically we've ever seen. That's how good he was. Like he was on track to finish
per dropback, not like running the ball.
No, per dropback. So it includes scrambles.
Okay.
So and runs like that. So like basically that metric will include designed runs and what have you, but that doesn't matter because I mean he does have design runs. That's what he does. That's his skill set. So he was on track to finish, again, small sample caveat, as the number 1 quarterback in fantasy football last year.
Next category, elite pocket passers, which is to say they put up great numbers. They're not giving you a lot in the running game. I'm trying to steal Joe's thunder here. We've got C.J. Stroud, Joe Burrow, Dak Prescott, Jordan Love.
So these guys don't give you the rushing upside that some of the elite guys will give you. And even maybe they'll give you some Patrick Mahomes' rushing upside, but not even that. And what this is these guys are behind Patrick Mahomes on a passing the ball basis. They're not going to, and obviously everybody's behind Patrick Mahomes on a passing the ball basis. But these guys have a combination of a track record or really interesting skill position players and good seasons last year. So CJ Stroud's got an elite group of receivers and obviously had maybe the best rookie season we've ever had. Jordan Love just got paid and he's got a deep and diverse set of receivers. And of course, when it comes to Joe Burrow, he's a perennial MVP candidate with great receivers, and Dak Prescott might be on the pass-heaviest team in the entire NFL. I would really, really like to see the Cowboys sign CeeDee Lamb very soon. I think that deal is going to get done. But Dallas right now, their running game is in shambles. I think they're going to pick up a running back, but I'm not really sure when that's going to happen or who that will be. And if CeeDee Lamb is back in there, I think Dallas has the opportunity to lead the NFL in pass attempts. So Dak Prescott firmly in the QB1 tier as a pocket passer. He doesn't give you the rushing upside that he did in his younger years.
Now we get to the category you're calling the Key Cogs, which is interesting. Kyler Murray, Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams. I also think it's interesting that you didn't put Jaden Daniels into the potential next elite category. Yeah. I guess that's because we haven't seen anything in the NFL yet.
So here is why I'm calling these guys the Key Cogs, because they're basically the keystone of my draft plan at the quarterback position. Because I am unlike recent years, but more in line with years past, I think I'm waiting on the quarterback position for fantasy this year. And the reason is these three guys are both cheap and offer dual threat upside. Kyler and Jaden Daniels more dual threat upside than Caleb Williams offers, though Caleb can run as well. But these guys are both cheap and offer potential cheat code. Kyler, you can get in like the 7th, 8th round. Jaden Daniels, you can get in the 9th, 10th round. Caleb Williams, you can get in the 9th and 10th round. I've already gone on record as saying I think Caleb Williams is going to break the Bears franchise passing record this year. That's not as big a hot take as it sounds. The Bears have never had a 4,000-yard passer. He's got an elite group of receivers. He's got dual threat ability. I think Caleb Williams has a very good rookie season. Jaden Daniels, in my opinion, at worst, is Justin Fields for fantasy. At worst. Somebody who can't throw but is running all over the field. He's got upside to be better than that. And Kyler Murray, in between his injuries, we've seen him be a very, very good fantasy quarterback. By the way, he added Marvin Harrison to his receiver room this year. So I am in on all three of these guys. And the reason I call them the Key Cogs is because they allow me to wait on the quarterback position, but also get that dual threat upside. And if I want a backup quarterback, if my roster allows me to carry one, I have enough roster spots, you can get that very cheaply and protect your investment. So these three guys are critical to me executing my quarterback draft plan. I'm not telling you that I won't draft Jalen Hurts if the price is right. I just think the price will be wrong for Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, and drafting one of these three guys allows me to get that dual threat upside, but also load up on other positions earlier in the draft.
Got it. All right, what about the next category, which is interesting? Another one-man category, which I greatly appreciate. And this is from a movie that I wonder if our producer, Jack, has ever seen it. It's called Caddyshack. I forget the guy's name, but he's such a legend. He is such a great character in this movie. And this line was Ted something. This line, well, we're waiting. is so
It's Ted
good.
Knight. It's Ted Knight.
Ted Knight. He's
Yeah.
so good. Well, the world needs ditch diggers too. Well, we're waiting. It's Trevor Lawrence, Joe.
Yeah, we're waiting for Trevor Lawrence to show that he is the generational talent that he was made out to be. And I think that was probably unfair to Trevor Lawrence because I don't think he was ever the talent of like an Andrew Luck. He was a great prospect. I think he's proven to be a good NFL quarterback, and the Jaguars signed into a big money deal. But he hasn't been the big time game changer that we've anticipated. He can offer you a little bit of rushing upside. His receiving core is interesting. If Gabe Davis comes in there and catches touchdowns the way he did in Buffalo, and Christian Kirk remains the great slot receiver that he is, and Brian Thomas comes in there and is the first round receiver that they drafted, then all of a sudden Trevor Lawrence is going to look really good. He still has Evan Ingram, but he hasn't reached that elite fantasy level. I think he's a good fantasy starting quarterback, a mediocre fantasy starting quarterback. But the potential to be better, we've just been waiting for it, and the longer we wait for it, the likelihood of it happening decreases.
Interestingly, I did the U.S. Army Bowl when he was in it, Joe. And the recruiting guys back then, based on what he was in high school, he was the best quarterback prospect most of them said they had ever graded or evaluated from 9th grade on. So I think he got that in high school, and then he won the national championship as a freshman at Clemson. Right?
He set the
And then it was
expectations
just
high
like-
for himself.
Then
yeah.
it was just the narrative, you know.
Yeah.
All right. The next category is cheap but replaceable. I'm curious to hear what that means. Brock Purdy, Kirk Cousins, Jared Goff, Tua Tagovailoa, not cheap. Matthew Stafford.
Not in real life, no. But in
Yeah,
fantasy,
Matthew
he's cheap enough.
Stafford, Aaron Rodgers, Geno Smith. Joe.
The reason I'm calling them cheap but replaceable is, well, Ross, these guys are getting drafted as basically backup quarterbacks for fantasy football. And so that indicates in and of itself that they're replaceable. But look at how big this tier is. Is there any real discernible difference between Kirk Cousins and Jared Goff from a fantasy football perspective? Is there any discernible difference between Tua and Matthew Stafford from a fantasy football perspective? To me, not a whole lot. So all of these guys, and by the way, Brock Purdy might lose Brandon Ayuk. So speaking of a guy who was elite by efficiency metrics last year, Brock Purdy, but a large part of that was Brandon Ayuk. So these guys, the reason these guys aren't getting drafted higher for fantasy is because there are a lot of them. And this goes hand in hand with my strategy regarding Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams. It's so easy to draft Jaden Daniels and have one of these Kirk Cousins or Matthew Staffords behind him who you know is going to give you solid production. They might not win your league for you, but you're not drafting them to win your league. You're drafting them to be the tires on your championship bus. And there's so many of these guys that you could just easily get and be completely fine with as your fantasy quarterback.
All right, 2 more guys to get to. The injured category is Justin Herbert. The now or never is Deshaun Watson. Give me what you got on Herbert and Watson.
Well, we already were concerned about Herbert because he has a completely deconstructed receiving group, and Jim Harbaugh wants to play big, dumb Jim Harbaugh football. He wants to run the ball down your throat. Justin Herbert now has a plantar fascia injury, which might affect him into the season, if not longer, and deep into the season. So his pass attempts are going to go down big time this year. Not really a guy I'm excited to draft at all. Deshaun Watson, it's simple. He hasn't been good in 4 years. If he's not good this year, he will never be good again. I think it's fair to say that. That being said, the Browns are reportedly interested in trading for Brandon Ayuk. They traded for Jerry Jeudy. They signed Amari Cooper to a bigger money deal. They've got David Njoku. The pieces are in place for Deshaun Watson, but if he's not good this year, he will never be good again.
Wow. And the Browns might be on the hook for – they still have 2 more years after this, right?
Yeah. You know, he was fine last year. They're paying for more than fine. He's got to deliver this season.
Joe, you always deliver, which is why I send people over to fantasypoints.com using the code 24feast. Joe and the whole team, Hanson, Brett Whitefield, they are incredible. Love what they do. Follow them on social at FG_Dolan. You can check me out at Ross Tucker NFL. We are at Ross Tucker Pod. And I'm stuffed. We're done.
Thanks for tuning in to Fantasy Feast. Make sure to also check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcasts on your favorite platform.